Mexican President Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador began his trip to the United States. China will impose visa restrictions on the U.S. individuals following the Trump administration's imposition of travel bans on Chinese officials. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres expressed concern on the foreign interference in the Libyan conflict. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Ernesto Dominguez. Mexican President Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador began his trip to the United States, his first foreign trip as a president, with visits Wednesday to the Lincoln Memorial and the statue of Benito Juárez, a former president and national hero in Mexico. During the president's visit to these historical sites, a group of citizens showed their support to the Mexican head of state. Lopez Obrador is scheduled to meet in the afternoon with the U.S. counterpart Donald Trump, and after the meeting, they will sign a joint statement. President Lopez Obrador is visiting this North American country after the coming into force of the new free trade agreement between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada, known as USMCA. On Wednesday, more than 50 heads of state and government, as well as prominent global employers and trade union leaders, took part in global discussions on COVID-19 and the world of labor. The president of Cuba, Miguel DiazCanel Bermudez, addressed the summit and stressed that neoliberal policies and savage capitalism are the deepest cause of the current global scenario.
We must remember that these devastating impacts are not just going to be because of the virus. Years of neoliberalist capitalist policy have led their consequences on the market. These are the deepest causes of the problems we face today. According to the experts, thousands of jobs have been lost and are threatened. Hundreds of millions of people are those who suffer from inequalities and whose survival is at stake.
Colombia will extend its lockdown measures to fight the spread of the coronavirus pandemic until August the 1st, though the country has already started easing some aspects of the quarantine at the time COVID-19 cases and deaths are increasing.
Extender el concepto del aislamiento preventivo obligatorio
to extend the mandatory preventive isolation until August 1st, but with some modifications that are important in terms of recovering a productive life and also other spaces of quality of life. There are 490 municipalities that are not affected by COVID, 295 municipalities that have not had any cases in the last 3 weeks, and 100 municipalities in Colombia that are not affected by COVID.
100 municipios en Colombia.
In Colombia, more than 150 human rights defenders have been killed so far in 2020. As a result of this reality, indigenous people, farmers, and Afro-defenders of human rights have united in a march along the roads of Colombia, rejecting violence and demanding the attention of the government to stop the wave of assassinations. From the city of Bogotá, our correspondent Hernán Tovar brings us more detail.
One of the sectors that has suffered the most from the armed conflict is the indigenous people. The most recent assassination was that of Rubilo Papelito, a teacher and leader of the Embera tribe, in the municipality of Alto Baudo, Choco. With this crime, the number of indigenous leaders killed has already exceeded 45 so far this year. The indigenous organization of the Colombia submitted a report of systematic violence against indigenous people in 52 years of armed conflict to the Special Jurisdiction for PEAC, and the violence continues.
Displacements: 2,954 indigenous leaders assassinated, 123 massacres, among them the high figures of sexual violence against indigenous women committed by legal and illegal armed groups. 39 of the 115 indigenous people at risk of physical and cultural extinction, according to the Constitutional Court.
The difficult situation of violence extends to rural and Afro-Colombian social leaders who organize their communities to promote resistance against illegal armed groups, the harmful influence of mega-projects, or the request compliance with the peace agreements. Such is the case of the rural leader Gentil Pasos Lescano, who was murdered in his home in the municipality of Algeciras, Huila department.
This is a government that is not interested in building peace in the country, that deeply discards the lives of human rights defenders, of ethnic and rural leaders, that is fully fulfilling its mandate to ear the shreds the agreement on the end of the conflict with one of the insurgent forces. In spite of this agreement, the structural cases of social, political, and economic exclusion remain.
In contrast, and given the resistance of social organizations in Colombia facing the growing wave of violence, several social organizations have taken over the country's highways. Indigenous people, farmers, Afro-Colombians, trade unions, and students have taken to the streets, waving the banners of respect for life and demanding the Iván Duque government ceases to remain indifferent to the assassination of their leaders.
We are in the city of Ibagué. We are marching for the life and dignity, and on that issue, we have received news that 2 people have been killed in our territory, from where we had to flee because of the violence. We are not saying that they threw us out, but we are fleeing because of violence, because it's not secret that social leaders are being killed, and it is why we are marching for life and dignity.
Social organizations assure that they will continue to protest and mobilize, denouncing the inaction of the government in the face of the systematic assassinations of social leaders and human rights defenders, whose momentum is also represented in the so-called March of Dignity that began its journey in Popayán, the capital of Cauca, on June 25, and hopes to arrive in the Colombian capital in the next few days.
In Bolivia, where according to a poll published by the Latin American Strategic Center for Geopolitics this Tuesday, Bolivia's movement towards socialism presidential candidate Luis Arce is set to secure close to 42% of the vote in the upcoming elections in September. According to the center, this percentage of popular support would allow Arce to win the presidency in the first round, far exceeded the Bolivian right-wing candidate Carlos Mesa, who is said to secure barely 26.8% of the vote. According to the poll, Janine Áñez, who self-proclaimed herself interim president following the coup last year and also plans to stand as a candidate, has half of the vote intention that Mesa enjoys. In Venezuela, the International Communications University will hold on Wednesday its 5th seminar led by Venezuelan anthropologist Sergio Arria as part of its online study program. Arria, who graduated from the Jussieu campus of Harris University, will analyze at 3 p.m. local time the audiovisual production applied to models of participatory and leading communication. The Vice President of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, Tania Diaz, and the Ministry of Culture, Ernesto Villegas, will also attend the seminar. And the alternate permanent representative of Cuba to the United Nations, Silvia Rodriguez, stated at a panel organized as part of the UN Virtual Counterterrorism Week that the hate speech and messages promoted by the U.S. government encourage terrorist acts against Cuba.
Last April, the Cuban embassy in the United States was attacked with a semi-automatic assault rifle. This serious terrorist attack endangered the life and the safety of the staff of the diplomatic mission and their family. At the time of the shooting, 10 Cuban diplomats were inside of the headquarters of the Cuban embassy. The perpetrator of the attack was arrested by the local authorities at the scene and remained in their custody. 2 months after the terrorist attack has passed, and the United States government is still unable to publicly condemn the events and acknowledge its terrorist nature. It also refrained from taking action against terrorist individuals and groups residing in the United States territory that incite violence against Cuba and its institutions. The attitude of clear complicity of the United States government involves the risk of being assumed as an endorsement of terrorism. The groups and individuals who have carried out terrorist acts against Cuba have operated for years and continue to do so with impunity in U.S. soil. The law enforcement agency of the United States government are fully aware of this.
Since July the 1st, when commercial flights operations resumed in the Dominican Republic, more than 15,000 passengers have arrived from different countries through the terminals operated by the company Aeropuertos Dominicanos 21. The number of passengers has been received by 3 of the main national airports after almost 4 months of being suspended due to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. With the reopening of the airports, international and local authorities have established a protocol for the social distancing of passengers and the use of a face mask among passengers inside the aircraft. The Minister of Tourism of Antigua and Barbuda, Charles Max Fernandez, said on Tuesday that the tourism industry is set to receive a major boost as air travel begins to pick up pace. With the openings of the airports, this sector will have a gradual recovery from the damage caused to the industry by the COVID-19.
We are working with the local hotel association to see how we can reintroduce the CARICOM rate to again encourage people within the region to come into the hotels. Caribbean Airlines, the last discussion I had with them last week, have indicated that by the end of next week, they should have a flight into Antigua.
Welcome back to From the South. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian described the U.S. withdrawal from the World Health Organization on Wednesday as another example of the United States being a pursuer of unilateralism and a quitter from treaties and organizations.
As the international fight against COVID-19 is now at a crucial stage, it is an international consensus that to support the WHO is to support international cooperation and to support saving lives. The U.S. withdrawal will undercut international combat against the pandemic, which will have particularly severe impact on developing countries that are in urgent need of international support. We urge the U.S. to fulfill its due international responsibilities and obligations and behave as a responsible major country. China calls on the international community to further consolidate the consensus of multilateralism, increase political support and financial input to the WHO, and jointly safeguard global public health security.
On Wednesday, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian said that its government will impose visa restrictions on U.S. individuals following the Trump administration's imposition of travel bans on Chinese officials. The senior Chinese official also urged the U.S. to stop interfering in China's internal affairs.
China strongly opposes the relevant U.S. measures in response to the wrong actions of the U.S. China decided to impose visa restrictions on U.S. individuals with egregious conduct related to the Tibet issues. We urge the U.S. to stop interfering in China's internal affairs with Tibet-related issues and not to go further down the wrong path, so as to avoid further damages to China-U.S. relations and exchanges and cooperation between the two countries.
In China, rescuers in the central part of the country are working without rest in the search of missing people after a landslide was triggered amid widespread flooding across much of the country. The disaster struck Huangwei County and Hubei province at around 4 a.m. According to rescue services, another 40 people were rescued and moved to shelters. Nearly 30,000 people have been evacuated since the beginning of the floods, which have left more than 120 people dead or missing across several provinces. This year's annual floods comes as China appears to have won at least a temporary victory over the coronavirus outbreak. We stay in China, where the college entrance exam, or Gaokao, is proceeding normally in Wednesday in Zhejiang County. It's China's Anhui province after severe flood-trapped examinees and delayed 2 tests scheduled for Tuesday. On the first day of Gaokao, River overflowed its banks and flooded downtown streets, and most of the examinees were unable to reach their schools. To make the exams to proceed smoothly, local public security department launched emergency traffic routes while building pontoon bridges overnight at the low-lying areas near the exam sites. The Gaokao, the country's notoriously tough national standardized test, is known as one of the hardest exams of the world. And almost 60 people have died in Japan after several days of flooding, most of them from the hardest hit Kumamoto prefecture. Heavy rains in Japan's central Gifu prefecture swelled on Wednesday rivers and triggered mudslides, destroying houses and roads. 58 people have died and more than 3.6 million people were advised to evacuate across the country. Tens of thousands of army troops, police and other rescue workers were mobilized to assist in several regions of the country. Japan is at high risk of heavy rain in early summer when wet and warm air from the East China Sea flows into a seasonal rain front above the nation. The British Prime Minister said on Wednesday he took full responsibility for deaths in care homes 2 days after he accused some homes of not properly following procedures during the COVID-19 crisis.
The last thing I want to do is to blame care workers for what has happened, or for any of them to think that I was blaming them, because they worked hard, incredibly hard throughout this crisis, looking after some of the most vulnerable people in our country and doing an outstanding job. And as he knows, tragically, 257 of them have lost their lives. And when it comes to taking blame, I take full responsibility for what has happened.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited the war-torn Lugansk region in eastern Ukraine, where 6 people died and more than 120 houses were incinerated. Hundreds of firefighters and rescue workers rushed to deal with a forest fire that has killed 6 people. According to emergency services, firefighters initially battled back the flames, but it spread again, helped by gust and wind and soaring temperatures, and eventually raged over an area of some 80 hectares. Water-bombing planes were also sent to the scene of the blaze.
People have lost everything. It is not only their houses, but also their documents, their money, their valuables. All is lost. This must be evaluated and people must be compensated.
Doctors and medical technicians went on a strike on Wednesday in Sarajevo canton as the profession undergoes salary negotiations amid the new coronavirus pandemic. New virus cases in Kosovo are increasing every day, with almost 9,000 new cases and 82 new deaths on Wednesday. Authorities have blamed the spike in cases on citizens not respecting social distancing guidelines, not wearing masks, and not washing their hands. Local authorities in the northern commune of Vashtri fined one of their medical staff €1,000 for violating the self-quarantine after being diagnosed as positive. In the Philippines, confirmed coronavirus infections soared past 50,000 on Wednesday in a troubling milestone for a country that has reopened an economy on the brink of recession while still struggling to combat the pandemic. The Department of Health reported more than 2,000 new cases, bringing the country's total to over 50,000, with a death toll that surpasses the 1,000. The Philippines' case load is the second largest in Southeast Asia, where the combined number of infections has surpassed those in China, where the pandemic emerged. President Rodrigo Duterte eased a tough virus lockdown in the Philippine capital on more than 12 million people on. Welcome back to From the South. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said on Wednesday that foreign interference in Libya conflict has reached unprecedented levels, with sophisticated equipment and mercenaries involved in the fighting.
Excellencies, time is not on our side in Libya. The conflict has entered a new phase, with foreign interference reaching unprecedented levels, including in the delivery of sophisticated equipment and the number of mercenaries involved in the fighting.
And the UN humanitarian coordinator for Yemen, Liz Grandi, stated that war-torn Yemen is once again on the brink of famine, as donor funds that averted catastrophe just 18 months ago have dried up.
Before the funding crisis, WFP was reaching 13 million people. Now, WFP is only able to reach about 8.5 to 8.6 to 8.7 million people a month, and many of those people on half rations. 18 months ago, Yemen was facing the worst famine in memory, modern memory. And what we're seeing now is a combination of factors that looks almost identical to what we saw then. Ships aren't being allowed to bring in life-saving commodities. The currency, the rial, is depreciating very quickly.
Lebanese supporters of Hezbollah and the Communist Party held a protest at the entrance of Beirut International Airport to denounce the visit of the U.S. Central Command Chief Kenneth McKenzie to the country.
We want to say to the American that it is forbidden for him to come to Lebanon. It is forbidden to celebrate these insolent celebrations. The Americans starved us and made the people homeless, and are still besieging us and starving us, and have helped the Zionist enemy to strike us over the years. It is true that we are facing an economic blockade, but it is impossible to have a blockade against our dignity. We will always be able to have honorable positions against them, which they are not used to.
We stay in Lebanon, where the Hezbollah Secretary-General Hassan Nasrallah condemned statements by the U.S. Ambassador to Lebanon, Dorothy Chia, who accused the organization of jeopardizing Lebanon's economic recovery and stability.
Since the new U.S. ambassador arrived to Lebanon, who we welcome along with all the ambassadors, she has dealt with Lebanon as though she is a military ruler or a high commissioner, or as if she has authority and everyone in Lebanon should fear her and ask for her consent. Every day the ambassador attacks Hezbollah and describes it in the ugliest way, saying it is a terrorist group, thief, drug dealer and a gang, while the Lebanese state stays silent without saying one word. What's more dangerous is inciting the Lebanese against each other. The U.S. ambassador goes to political leaders in Lebanon and turns them against Hezbollah and the allies of the resistance. She's pushing the Lebanese towards infighting, sedition, and civil strife.
Zimbabwe's President Emerson Mnangagwa has fired Health Minister Obadiah Moyo, who has been charged with corruption over illegally awarding a multi-million-dollar contract for medical equipment. Moyo was arrested last month following an investigation by the country's Anti-Graft Commission. The senior official has been freed on bail and is scheduled to appear in court on July 20 or 31st. If convicted, the former hospital administrator faces a fine or up to 15 years in prison. Moyo is facing charges of corruption and criminal abuse of his office over his role in a deal with the United Arab Emirates-based company to supply personal protective equipment and COVID-19 test kits. To date, Zimbabwe has registered 787 coronavirus cases and 9 related deaths. In the Central Republic of Africa, customs officials have warned of a downturn in revenue in that country due to COVID-19 pandemic's impact on the economy. Meanwhile, locals have complained about a spike in food prices and thefts by armed groups.
We are still getting fish, but prices have gone up. The roads are blocked and there are armed groups who prey on the transporters. They take their goods and their money. How can we move forward like this? Our government isn't even looking out for us. We are all going to die.
Our job is to take the money and put it into the coffers of the state. So this is a problem for us. We have targets to meet at the end of the month, and if the combos of trucks do not come, that means we are not going to meet these targets. Right now, it is taking the vehicle's drivers weeks to get their COVID-19 test results at Garubulei, border crossing point with Cameroon, before they can come to Bangui. That's resulting in food crisis, it's costing our truckers, and it's hard for them to earn the money back once they get to Bangui. All this is going to add to the losses that we have seen in respect to the customs space occupied by the rebel groups.
And we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net, and also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Ernesto Dominguez. Thank you for watching.